Hey guys, thanks for watching. This is about 2011 CTS that I've got, just replacing the front shocks. This car's been real good, but the front seems to be a little bit loose lately, and I decided I need to replace the shocks and probably some upper A-arm bushings. I convinced myself that I needed to do that, but as you'll see later on in the video, I was a little off base on that, so we'll talk about that. Anyways, this is what I bought. I bought standard OEM shocks from GM. I like the way the car drove and rode for the most part, while the shocks were in good shape, so I used those. And then I also bought some Rev Shift polyurethane bushings for those upper A-arms bushings that I thought were shot. So those are the two things that I purchased for each side. And I also rented a spring compressor because you'll need that later on in the process. Alright, so this is what it looks like after you take your wheel off. You've got your upper A-arm here. This is kind of the bracket that holds all the shock and spring assembly in place in the shock tower. Of course, you've got your rotor here. This is a front view over on this side. This is a rear view as well. On this side, you can see the brake caliper there. All right, moving along. So the first step that I did was to remove the strut cross brace, because you'll have to take it off of both sides to get even just one of these off. The reason for that is that if you take a look over here, you've got a nut bolt combo that's built into a single fastener that first fastens the shock tower to the chassis, and then the strut brace goes down over that stud and fastens down. So you really have to take the whole brace off on both sides to do that. So you'll have 5 bolts to take off. You'll have 1, 2, 3, 4 here, and then on the back side there's another 5th bolt that you have to take out. They're all the same size, and I think they're 18 millimeter as I recall. Alright, so that gets the shock mount detached from the shock tower. Pretty simple. The next thing I did was to loosen or remove the upper A-arm from the, I'm not sure what this part is called, but it's it goes up and down, and you know, I guess it's maybe part of the steering knuckle. But at any rate, to do that, you need to use an Allen key to keep the bolt that attaches to the ball joint in place, while also loosening a nut around that bolt. Let's go back. Whoops. Let's go back one more. A nut around that bolt to drop these two. Now these were not fused for me. It came right apart, and I let the lower part of the suspension just travel downwards after that disconnected. That was not a problem. Alright, so this is what it looks like after I got that disconnected. You can see this knuckle arm here just kind of floating down free below, and it really didn't cause any problems. The next step is to remove the 2 bolts that hold the shock onto the lower onto the lower control arm. There's just a little bolt in the back here and then one in the front. Once you do that, you can actually work that shock and shock tower and A-arm out of the wheel well fairly easily. Now this is a rear drive only car. I don't know what that's going to look like on an all-wheel drive car. So you may have to drop that entire front assembly on those cars. I just don't know. I don't have one. This is what it looks like when it's out. Pretty easy to get the tower out on the rear drive car. Alright, so this is another closer look. Alright, so in order to get the shock separated from the shock tower, you have to use spring compressors. There's just too much tension on the spring to get that out safely. So I rented spring compressors. I fiddled around with a couple of ways to do it. And the best way I found was to put the nut of the spring compressor on the lower end of the spring, or the tighter coils on the spring. That was the easiest, best way to do it. So that's what I ended up doing. That's not what you see in this picture, but I did end up doing it that way. So anyways, so again, on this nut that holds the shock onto the shock tower mount, you've got to use that Allen key method with a socket. And they'll probably be rusted, so you might want to lube them up a little bit with WD-40 or something. All right, so this shows the old shock over here. You will transfer over a couple of parts from that to the new shock, and it's going to be this plastic rubbery thing at the top, and then also there's a flange that you can use on the new shock, but the new shock does come with a new flange, so I used a new flange. But it didn't have this rubber piece, so I transferred that over to the new shock. Okay, so once that's done, you can actually reassemble that whole assembly in a reverse order. Now, I was going to take and replace these upper A-arm, I'll show it here in these pictures, these bushings here. But when I took it apart, it was really obvious that they were in good shape and didn't need to be replaced. And I'm not real wild about replacing parts that don't need to be replaced. So I left that intact, put that all back together, and reassembled the shock tower. Now, with that said, I had been hearing creaking and groaning in the suspension, leading me to believe that these were bad, because that's a fairly common problem, but it wasn't the case. It happened to be the lower control arm that was causing the problem, and I've got a little video here I'm going to play that will let you hear that sound. When the suspension travels, and I'm manually making it travel there, it makes that creaky, groany, squeaky sound that you might hear maybe going over bumps or something. I couldn't get a good shot of the actual bushing to see how bad they are, but the fact that they're making that noise tells me that they're in bad shape. So at any rate, I'm going to have to replace those bushings at some point. They're definitely causing some problems in handling. So I'll make a new video when I do that. But at any rate, go ahead and put those shock towers back together in reverse order. Put them back into the car. Everything bolts up fairly easily. I did use a jack to jack up the suspension while I was reassembling the shock tower back into the car. But that was all pretty simple. So again, I'm not a mechanic, but I do work on my cars, and this seemed to work for me. So thanks for watching. Good luck.